Hello. In 1910, there was a famous pair of wealthy sisters from an aristocratic lineage named Dorothea Williamson and Claire Williamson. They inherited a large fortune from their family and began a journey around the world. Both sisters were born and raised in England and were over 30 years old. They had no financial pressures, so they had a lot of free time to enjoy the life they had always dreamed of. In the second year of their trip, while staying at the Queen Hotel in Canada, they accidentally saw an advertisement for a sanatorium in a newspaper. The author was a doctor who introduced that she had a very scientific and effective natural treatment method that could help patients eliminate many problems that modern medicine could not solve. This made the two sisters very curious. The two sisters did not have any serious health problems, but they often got sore throats when they caught colds. In a beautiful town like a painting, natural therapies were being used to eliminate chronic diseases. This was certainly exciting news for two wealthy women who wanted better health. With a desire to try, the two sisters bought many books by the doctor above and finally decided to go to a very strange town in Washington state to meet her. Later, people learned that this was truly a journey to hell, and the place they were about to go was called Wilderness Heights. To get to the mansion above, they had to take a ferry across the beautiful Puget Sound, then pass through a small village called Olalla. In the spring of 1911, following the directions on the map, the two sisters finally arrived in Olalla. After searching, they finally reached the remote town. The sanatorium of Wilderness Heights was located at the highest point in town. The owner of the mansion was named Linda Hazard. She was a middle-aged, tall, quiet woman with a kind smile. As promised in previous correspondence, she skillfully introduced the surrounding facilities and systematically analyzed the medical conditions of the two sisters, while encouraging them to participate in the treatment at the mansion as soon as possible. In her self-published book in 1908 titled Fasting for the Cure of Disease, she had declared that food was the root of all health problems. Specifically, she wrote that the feeling of appetite is a craving, hunger is also a kind of desire, and desires are never satisfied. The treatment plan proposed by Dr. Linda was an alternative therapy called scientific fasting. She was one of the few recognized fasting therapy experts in America. She believed that the root cause of all diseases lay in the fact that humans need too much food, causing the production of toxins in the body and generating many different diseases. To truly restore the body, the digestive system needs to rest completely. During the fasting period, she would use some special methods to completely remove impurities from the body. Dr. Linda had published several books on the above theory and had repeatedly verified the safety and scientific nature of fasting therapy. At the same time, she also claimed to have created a unique new method based on many years of clinical research that could cure all diseases. Claire and Dor were not the only patients at the mansion. Before they arrived, she had also treated dozens of people. Dr. Linda spoke very elegantly, and her words were especially persuasive. This made the two sisters, who were vegetarians, very satisfied. Without hesitation, both quickly paid the monthly fee of $60 and officially began their fasting treatment at a nearby apartment. However, living here was not as they imagined, that they would take daily walks in a small town and drink fresh fruit juice. Not long after entering the nursing home, the two sisters began to realize things were not as beautiful as they thought. The main things they needed to complete during the treatment process included the following. First, regarding diet, the two sisters were strictly restricted in eating and drinking. Under the supervision of nurses, they were only allowed to drink half a cup of juice from tomatoes or aloe vera, etc., each day to ensure the digestive system got enough rest. Second, at around 3 p.m. every day, they would have to soak in a bathtub for laxative and enema treatments. After that, they would soak in more than 10 liters of clean water to remove accumulated toxins in the body through excretion. Finally, the most important part of the entire treatment process was the special massage therapy performed by Dr. Linda herself. After the enema, she would use her fists and palms to press on the patient's head and back while frantically shouting the words, "Eliminate," along with violent actions such as slapping their bodies with a very strong force like that of a man. This seemed to be understood as a method of healing through some form of transmitting will to the patient. In the spring of 1911, there were no other patients in the mansion. Dr. Linda was always secretly by the side of the two sisters 5 days a week to constantly warn that the different reactions they encountered when fasting were all due to their condition reaching an extremely serious stage, and they needed to persevere to completely detoxify in order to solve the problem at its root. Under such frequent brainwashing, despite encountering many adverse symptoms, such as dizziness, even bruising and pain to the point of crying and screaming during each massage, because they did not want to give up halfway, the two sisters still chose to listen to the doctor's advice and continue the treatment process. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were an important period in the development of antibiotics and surgery. Although clear diagnosis had taken an important position in modern medicine, many other alternative treatment methods had also achieved no less results. The case of Wilderness Heights was one of the strangest cases. To alleviate the pain caused by hunger and excessive excretion, the two sisters would encourage each other by reading some excerpts from theology books, according to the method prescribed by the doctor. With constant suggestions, they felt their bodies had really improved in the beginning. However, even for someone who is not a medical expert, it would be easy to know that the situation would soon become much worse. By April 1911, after 4 weeks of fasting, they felt things started to become strange. Call began to discover that the time her sister Dorothea used was mainly for sleeping. Their bodies were getting weaker. The two often fainted, and they no longer had the strength to pick up light objects. Even the initial enema process, which only took half an hour to complete, now had to be increased to more than 3 hours because they no longer had the strength to perform the movements as prescribed by the doctor. To allow the two sisters to continue completing the treatment without having to worry, Dr. Linda even made 2 simple hammocks next to the bathtub for them to lie in for treatment. Initially, the two sisters often asked the doctor if their condition was improving, but as time passed, they quickly lost the strength to talk. Dorothea and Claire could not stand normally, but could only crawl around the room. They were so thin that their spines could be seen under their skin. The scariest thing was that even the doctor they trusted had completely changed. Once, Seal saw her sister Dorothea mumbling with Dr. Linda about whether it was due to the fasting treatment that she had so many symptoms. As a result, Dr. Linda, who was usually very polite and gentle, suddenly used both hands to grab her head, shaking and hitting hard. She roared with a completely different voice. "The real problem is in your brain." In the 8th week, after seeing such a horrifying scene, Claire finally changed her mind. After coming here, she thought this was certainly not a normal doctor. One night when no one was around, she quietly told Dorothea that she would go out to find help. Then she tried to support her body and leave the room. At that time, Dorothea could no longer move. In May 1911, in Sydney, Australia, a nanny of the Williamson family named Margaret Conway received a letter from Claire. She had been the nanny of the two sisters since they were young. Because their birth mother died early, she had taken care of them until adulthood. After receiving Claire's letter, what made her feel extremely uneasy was that what Claire wrote seemed very strange, different from her usual very delicate writing style. Not only were the things described, what worried her most was that Claire mentioned many stories about the two sisters recovering their health in a small town. Besides constantly praising a doctor named Linda Hazard, Claire also repeatedly mentioned that Dorothea's brain was having problems. The nanny did not know what had happened to the two sisters. Because she was so worried, she immediately bought a boat ticket to the described location. When she arrived at the mansion, she continuously walked around the area to search for the two sisters, and finally she saw Dorothea. The person who was previously considered a beautiful young lady now weighed less than 30 kilograms. Her consciousness was impaired and her reactions were very slow. She was no longer the same, and her sister Claire had passed away. The body had been autopsied and embalmed. According to Dr. Linda, the cause of Claire's death was due to cirrhosis, a complication from accidentally taking the wrong medicine when she was young. while Dorothea had brain problems as described in Claire's letter. Linda was a good doctor with excellent medical skills, a patient and gentle voice, and also very persuasive. But since seeing the woman in front of her, Mrs. Margaret always had a feeling that was both familiar and disgusting. She suppressed the anger in her heart, demanding to take Claire's body and the weak Dorothea away, while planning to search for relatives of the two sisters to discuss. However, as if she had predicted all of the above, Linda quickly took out 2 letters and handed them to Mrs. Margaret. She had just opened them and was dizzy. They were 2 letters signed by the 2 sisters, the content being to authorize Dr. Linda Hazard as the guardian and sole heir of all the assets of the 2 sisters, and at the same time donate their bodies to the mansion after their death. At that time, Mrs. Margaret finally knew why she always had that familiar feeling. It was because the clothes and jewelry that Linda wore were all things that Claire had used when she was alive. Since she was at the nursing home in town, no one knew exactly how many people had died due to the fasting therapy here. Only after the incident of the Williamson sisters was exposed did the terrible mansion above finally catch the eyes of everyone. Linda Hazard was born in 1867. Her real name was Linda Laura Burfield, born in Carver County, Minnesota. The initial life of this woman was nothing special. In 1903, she met Samuel Chrisman Hazard, a soldier who was expelled from the unit for embezzling military funds. Samuel was a scoundrel and addict, but Linda loved him very much and agreed to marry him. In 1906, Samuel took Linda to Washington to build a new life. The couple bought a house in Olalla and opened an office in Seattle. Linda had never studied a day of modern medicine. Her medical license and business license were all obtained thanks to her grandfather's connections. Self-proclaimed as a fasting master, for more than 10 years she had received dozens of patients and used various methods to invite them to participate in her scientific fasting treatment. According to the medical records of the mansion, the causes of death of these people were very diverse, including tuberculosis, heart disease, kidney disease, etc., and no one had ever died of starvation. What was stranger was that in subsequent investigations, the police discovered that she always strictly controlled the steps of patients' correspondence. After controlling their minds, she would make people disclose all their assets and clearly state in the documents and will that all assets and bones would be voluntarily transferred to Wilderness Heights for processing. Before coming, they were extremely wealthy people, and after death, only a few dozen dollars remained in their names. In fact, the entire Wilderness Heights mansion was actually just the legacy of a deceased patient. In fact, Linda was not the first person to believe in the theory of fasting to cure diseases. She was influenced by Dr. Edward Hooker Dewey, an American. He was born in 1837, died in 1904, and was the author of the book The No Breakfast Plan and the Fasting Cure, published in 1900. Dr. Dewey believed that all human diseases were due to overeating, so eating less and fasting would solve all health problems. As soon as his book was published, the British medical journals strongly refuted and criticized it as the most short-sighted and poisonous thinking. Nevertheless, not a few people were still convinced by the above theory. Like Dr. Dewey, Linda believed that eating was the root of all diseases. While Dr. Dewey mainly encouraged eating less, she planned to eliminate food from the menu. On August 11, 1911, Linda was arrested for the murder of Claire Williamson, and she had never admitted her crime. At the end of 1912, after the incident at the mansion was thoroughly resolved, Linda's case was officially brought to trial in district court. Because at that time the management of medical facilities was still rudimentary, the law had no basis to determine the issue of medical negligence. In addition, all the internal organs of the victim's body were removed and cremated by her, so evidence of the crime could not be found. In the end, she was only sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison, to the regret and anger of countless people. Finally, the case ended with charges of fraud and murder. In the early 20th century, before Linda was arrested, Dorothea's uncle, John Herbert in Oregon, had paid $1,000 to redeem her from the mansion above. According to Dorothea's account, Claire had been discovered by her soon after she went out to seek help. From that day on, the two sisters were completely isolated. They never saw each other again. Like all the patients who had disappeared here, Claire's body was cremated and disposed of. The girl could never return to her homeland until she died. In 1908, there were two patients who were treated here who also died. They were two wealthy Norwegian immigrant mothers and sons. The mother's name was Daisy Maud, 38 years old, and her son Ida, 3 years old. They died after 50 days of fasting. After the death of Daisy and Ida's mother and son, patients continued to die here, and Linda always shirked responsibility, blaming the diseases they had contracted before coming to her nursing home. She even personally performed autopsies to collect treatment results. In 1910, there was a young construction engineer named Earl Edward Erdman, 24 years old, who came to Linda because of indigestion. He carefully recorded his treatment process diary for nearly 2 months, starting from February 1st, 1910. According to what was recorded throughout the process, his breakfast consisted of only a few oranges or fasting. Lunch was fasting or drinking a little boiled vegetable water. Dinner was also fasting or eating a little soup or vegetable juice. Finally, on March 28th, he also died of starvation. Afterwards, Linda continued to welcome Louis E. Radar, a former Washington legislator. He had stomach pain and after 37 days of treatment, also lost his life in an emaciated state. His weight was not up to 45 kilograms. In 1935, the mansion was destroyed by a fire. However, the apartment where the Williamson sisters and other patients lived, the enema bathtub, and the wooden boards used for dissection all remained intact. Many people have heard whispering and soft sounds in the room. According to witnesses, these sounds seem to be saying, "Take me out." As for how many people were buried under this land, it remains a mystery to this day. They all died of desperation and hunger under Linda's unscientific view. In 1915, after 2 years in prison, Linda was pardoned early by Governor Ernest Lister for good behavior in prison, but on the condition that she must leave the United States permanently. On December 25, 1915, Linda was released on pardon. She moved to New Zealand and continued to practice, and was arrested again, but this time it was only a fine. In 1920, after many times in and out of prison, she still found every way to secretly return to the mansion she had always longed for. Despite the notoriety that caused many patients to die, she was still trusted by some of the people of Washington. At the same time, she re-established a facility called the Health School here. She reopened for business, continued to receive patients, and in 1938, 27 years after the Williamson sisters came here, she also contracted pneumonia. She immediately began to implement the fasting therapy on herself. As a result, she died on June 24th at the age of 70. The cause was excessive hunger after 2 to 3 days of treatment, according to her own method. Finally, she truly believed in what she had put forward. The price she had to pay was also the tragedy she had caused to countless innocent people. Although the case contains many horrifying and sad truths, this true story is also a wake-up call, reminding us to be careful with quacks and vague treatment methods that have no scientific basis and have not been clearly certified. The video ends here today.